And here we go. Welcome, Thomas Wilburn.
Okay, so earlier last week, I put up actually a guide to setting up WordPress and GitHub. Did everyone get a chance to take a look at that? Mike, did you point that out in class?
Yeah, I did.
Just out of curiosity, how many people have taken me up on that so far and actually like done it?
I haven't done it. I've looked at it.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so if we were to pull that up real quick.
Yeah, I linked to it from my sign-in page.
Okay. Here, so this is a complete guide. When I actually spec'd this out at home, this was 26 steps, but I thought that was kind of a terrifying title. Was like, deploy WordPress in 26 steps. So I was like, plus a lot of them are actually shorter, like they merge together. It's not really a big deal. So what we're going to do today is first, actually, we're going to talk about this conceptually a little bit. And so we'll transfer the screen. And then we're actually going to put it together once that's done. Okay. So the idea of deploying from Git, and this is based on the methodology that I have learned when I've been working at actual software companies like ArenaNet and Big Fish. The idea is that nobody should ever be working directly on the server. And I understand that for a lot of your time here, that's how you've done things, right? Is that you FTP into a server and you would live edit code there, which is fine, kind of. It's not great if there's only one of you. But when there's more than one person and you need to work on a project, that's a recipe for disaster, right? Because you could have two people that edit the file at the same time, and in which case only one of you is going to win. You could have some FTP clients cache code, and then they will try and refresh the remote directory. So somebody might have connected to this yesterday, and then when they reconnect, even if you've done work since then, theirs will decide to overwrite it just because it thinks that it should. It has an old copy of the directory. So it's a really bad idea for you all to be editing these files directly on the server. Instead, the plan of attack is that everybody works on a local machine, meaning on your own computer, you have WordPress set up. And depending on what kind of computer you're using, there are a variety of solutions to this. Usually there's something in the AMP that's an easy download. So there's MAMP on a Mac, Windows, there's XAMPP and WAMP, whatever. You could just install, frankly, like, you could install all the pieces individually. It doesn't really matter. But you get the local setup running. You develop there on your local theme. So you have your own database, you have your own theme folder that you're working in. And that theme folder is then linked to the central GitHub repo.
And only the theme folder.
Right. You're not going to check in all of WordPress. That will make you miserable. You're only going to check in the theme folder. And so each time that you make a change that you're happy with, right? Like you get a custom post type up and working, or you finish this block of CSS that you want to use on the page, you commit that locally, you synchronize it to GitHub. Everyone else is committing locally, they're synchronizing to GitHub. And what Git does very well is that all of your changes can be merged together and synchronized. So it's kind of like Dropbox for code, except that it's very social and it's very trainable, and it knows a lot more about the types of file, right? Dropbox is just kind of a dumb file store, but GitHub understands that you have files that can be merged, that are text files. You can alert other people when you commit. And since it's all tracked, it also makes it really easy to roll back. So if somebody does something and it screws something up, you can just say, well, I want to revert that change and go back to some other period of time. From here, GitHub is linked to your staging server. And the only thing after WordPress, like the initial WordPress installation is done, and after you link up this folder, the only thing that ever changes files on this server is through pulling from GitHub. You no longer FTP to the server. As long as you do that, the deployment process will work. If you break down, if you have a terrible moment of weakness, and you go in and you FTP in and you change a file, and you don't, I guess, reconnect that, then this process that I'm setting up will no longer work flawlessly for you. And then you have to learn more about Git. And I'm not sure all of you are here for more learning at this stage in the program, right? You want to do things. So once this is set up, you log in here, you run a single command, and that's the only way that you ever update anything on the server. Any changes and testing that you need to do, you do it locally. And then you commit, and then regularly you pull from GitHub to staging, and that's how you actually get stuff updated so that everyone can see it and share it. Right? So I personally like this is safer, but my personal belief is that this is also faster, right? One of the really nice things about running this stack is that you don't need a network connection. You can develop all of your stuff without ever being connected to the internet because it's all running locally. And you never have to wait for those files to upload before you can test them. You never have to switch windows and drag and drop so that you can see your changes, right? Everything's just running locally. To me, it's tremendously powerful to just have the entire stack running right there. And you can actually make this more elaborate. When I've worked in software, we would actually, not only do you have a GitHub repo, but you've got additional branches. And so you don't just deploy from GitHub to one place, but you have different points along that repo, and you're deploying one to stage, one to dev, one to live, so that you can check out the code in different states of readiness. And that way it's always gone through 3 testing servers before it gets out to the world, which is really good practice. You guys are building a WordPress thing that's probably not that crucial that we are that diligent about it. But it's good to know that that's the way you can do things. So with that theory out of the way, what I want to do now is I'm going to share the screen again and freak out the holo mirrors. Excellent. Cool. And I'm going to do just the part that involves setting up the connection between your server and the repository. Because the rest of it, depending on where you're hosted. So if you're running on EC2, there's the guide on link from Mike's assignment page that will, there we go, that will show you how to set up the EC2 server. If you are using DigitalOcean, they actually just have an image, and you can just start with WordPress, and then you just need to go in and link up the theme. There's a variety of ways that you can set this up. But the key part of setting up the Git section is the thing that I want to walk through today. So we're going to connect actually to a server that I have. That's fine. That's me. You thought you'd all see my password. You were wrong. And we're going to go back. We're going to take a look at this. And you are going to skip down to the section called Connecting to GitHub. Here we go. So I've got my lovely ASCII flowchart, which is just what I drew on the board. And then we are going to start by creating our repo. So I'm going to go to github.com. I'm going to log in. And I would really strongly advise that you start this process by creating an empty repo on the website, because it gives you a really nice starting point for how you want to make sure that your work is done, and make sure that the repo isn't empty, it won't have anything weird in it, and then you can clone from there, and it makes the entire workflow a lot easier to kind of work around. So let's shouldn't be reading my password out loud. Got that right. Excellent. You're all using 2-factor auth, right? That's important. Don't get your identity stolen. Okay. Do you? No, I mean, that seems like a great way to do it. So if we start you can always work it out from first principles. I like that line. All right, so we're going to start a new repository, and I'm just going to call this WEB210 test. Call it whatever you like. You can add a description. We're going to make it public. And I'm going to say initialize this repository with a README. And the reason that I do that is because if you don't do one of these things, or you add like a git ignore or add a README, the repository initially will start bare and you can't clone it. But if it has something in it, you can then clone that to both your desktop machine when you want to work on it for WordPress, and you can clone it to the server, which is what we're about to do in a second. So we're going to create this repository, and here we go. We've got a README. It's just the page name. And if we want, we can actually do a little bit of editing here. So for example, we're creating a WordPress theme, right? And every WordPress theme has to have, at the very least, a style.css. That's the thing that tells WordPress about the theme and has all the metadata. So we might create our style.css. While we're still on the website, we might say author, Thomas Wilburn. I don't actually remember any of the codes for WordPress, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to create that. Now we've got these two files. So your theme, when you set it up in your repo, the root folder of the theme is also the root folder of the repository, meaning that there should not be a subfolder inside this repo that's like, oh, my repo has my theme, and then there's a folder in that that has the actual theme in it, right? You just want the files right here at the root level, so that when we clone it, it just goes directly into a folder and it works. We don't have to move things around or do any shenanigans. Okay, so now we've got our repository. And if we wanted to, we could log into the desktop client. We could go to GitHub, and we could watch this take forever to load up, as it usually does. And we could clone this to the desktop. So in a second, I'll show how that works while it gets started. In the meantime, let's take a look at the other side of this, which, oh, never mind, I'll just log in. I'm always super nervous that I'm going to get that wrong, and it's going to take me forever to fix it. Excellent. Seriously?
Oops.
Yep. So much for that.
Good not.
I'm going to keep that in mind and then never do it. Try that one more time. All right, you know what? We'll come back to that. That's not necessarily important. All right, so on the other side of things, so you're going to clone this thing to your desktop, you're going to work on it. And so when you choose to clone a project, it will ask you where you want to put it. And so you'll just go into your WP content folder, the themes folder, and you will clone to a subfolder in there, and there you go, right? You're all set up. You can start working on developing. On the other side, though, of that little flow chart that we've got, we have the server that we are going to stage to. So I'm going to make these colors a little easier for you guys to see. Default foreground black, default background white. Hey, cool. All right. And we are going, let's increase the font size on that just a little bit more. So how many of you have used Bash, actually, or a terminal shell? A couple. Some of you. Yeah, that's a fairly good amount. Excellent. So you're going to need to use this, but you don't necessarily need to know a tremendous amount about Bash in order to get this stuff done. Basically, you need to know how to navigate a few directories, but for the most part, the commands that you need to use are all spelled out in this document, right? And so they're going to look like this. It's going to be this kind of like shaded thing, and I've got some screenshots of where I've run these different commands. And so we're actually going to run right now. We're going to set up a new key on this server. So the way that the connection to GitHub works is that they don't want you to use a password when it comes to connecting externally. When you log into the client, it uses that password. But when we log in from a server or from a command line somewhere, we use what's called a key pair, which is where your server has one half of the key and GitHub has the other half. By connecting those two, those are the only two keys that fit together, right? They are these very, very long 4,900 or 4,096-bit prime numbers. They are enormous prime numbers, and only the two of those numbers factor in a certain way mathematically, so that when we give one of them to GitHub and then we sign in with the other, those two mesh, and it knows that it has to be us. And that's a lot stronger than a password because, as we all know, right, people choose stupid passwords and then everything gets broken into and all of your code is erased and your credit card is stolen. And you are now the owner of a boat in like Macau. So we want to prevent that whole chain of events, and we're going to use this key pair instead. So when we run,
inappropriate photos.
right, exactly. Yeah, anything that you've taken on iPhoto, as a number of celebrities have discovered, should not be protected with a weak password. So we're going to run this command, and it's called SSH keygen, and it generates keys, which is exactly what it says it does. We're going to specify that the type is RSA, which is the type of encryption algorithm that it's going to use. The bit depth is going to be 4096, which is what GitHub would like you to use. It's very strong encryption. C is going to be just a tag that we provide, and they ask you to use your email address. So I'm going to say twilburn@seattlecolleges.edu. When I run this, it's going to say, okay, I'm generating a key pair. It's going to say, enter the file in which to save the key. It's going to ask me a number of questions. I actually already have a key pair, so I'm going to generate this to a different file, but you can just hit enter through all of these questions. There is no need to try and second guess or change them, right? So I'm going to call this test. But other than that, I'm not going to enter a passphrase. And it's going to say, okay, so your identification has been saved. Here's your fingerprint. Here's your random art image. I don't really know why they do that. There's probably a good reason, but it's just kind of charming. It's like a tiny Petri dish or something. I don't really know. And so once we've generated that key, we can then give the one half, the public half, to GitHub. And we'll keep the other half, and that's going to serve as our password. So to get that half, we're going to go to, and we're going to run this command that spits the key out onto the command line. And it's the command cat. And cat stands for concatenate. It is not the older form of kitten. So we're going to say I'm going to cat from SSH ID RSA.pub.
I'm glad I'm not the only one that uses scripted jokes.
It's not that scripted. That's why they're so lame. And so it's going to spit out. When you cat this, right, it concatenates it, but it doesn't have a destination, so it just spits it out to the console. So this is a good way. Anytime you need to read a file, and just display it, you can use the cat command on your console, on your shell session. And on Windows, we can just select this, and it will automatically be copied to the keyboard for us. On a Mac, you can select it, and then you can hit Command-C, and it will copy. You don't hit Control-C, because that's not copy, but also because Control-C cancels things on the command line. So once we've copied that, we go back to GitHub, and we say, okay, GitHub, in my settings, I have a section over here on the left for SSH keys. And you can see where I've got a whole bunch of them listed, right? Because I have a bunch of different computers that like work and home that I use to connect to. And I'm going to add an SSH key. I'm going to give it a title, and the title doesn't matter, so I might say just WEB210 staging. This is just so you can keep track of what it is. And then the key is where we paste in all of this nonsense. So we take all of that stuff that we generated the key, and then we copied out the public one, and it has to be idrsa.pub. We don't want to send them the private key. And we just paste it right in there, and we say add key. And my key is already in use, but your key will be new. And so at that point, we can test it, right? So now we have both keys on our server. GitHub has the public key. We can make sure that those two keys actually are going to sync up. So when we look in our guide, there's a command that we run here where we SSH to GitHub, and we try to log in, and it'll tell us if it worked. So we'll say ssh-t git@github.com. And it says, hi, Thomas Wilburn, you've successfully authenticated, but GitHub does not provide shell access. So they're basically saying, we're not going to let you log in. Well, we are going to tell you that your identity is correct. And if you use the Git client, you're good to go. So at this point, our computers are connected, right? Our local computer, had we been able to log in, we'd be connected from there. That's the easy part. There's a nice graphical client for Windows and Mac that you can get. The server side is harder, but it wasn't that hard, right? I mean, we basically ran three commands and we pasted some stuff into a web form and we're good to go. Now we just need to clone the repo and make sure that that's all connected. So let's say that I have a WordPress installation. I'm in that directory. I'm going to say I'm going to go to the WP content folder. Make dir WP content. Yours would already be made because you have uploaded this already. I'm going to make a themes directory, which again you would already have because you have uploaded WordPress to your server. And then in my themes folder, this is where I'm going to clone my repo. So this is where from here I'm going to tell it, hey, reach out to GitHub and go download that folder from GitHub to inside of my WordPress directory.
Locally or staging server?
This is on the staging server. All of this is on the staging server. So to do that, I'm going to say git, and all git commands start with the git word, right? So they are all basically, you have a master git command, and then there are subcommands that we run. So there's like git pull and git push, git clone, git branch or rebase, all of these different commands that we can run. What we're going to use right now is we're going to use git clone. So we're going to say, I would like to clone git at github.com / my username / my repo name, which is web210 test.git. I hit enter, and it clones it into WP content, themes, web210 test. And if I list the things that are in my folder, I can see that there is a folder there. And if I go into that folder and I list, here are all of my files, right? So here's my style.css, which I can cat now that I know how to do this. And I can see that it contains whatever was on the server. Cat is concatenate, meaning to combine things. If you were to type multiple files, so if you were to say cat readme and style, it would jam the two of them together. So there's the part that's the readme, there's the part that's the style. To be honest, I think most people really rarely actually, like most people use it to just display files, which is kind of weird, but that's what people do with it. So yeah. So we use.
You just clone this to your staging server.
That's correct.
So how are you connected to your staging server?
So
that's the one thing I'm not following.
Right. So I'm logged into my staging server using a terminal session, and that's either PuTTY or on a Mac or Linux, it's SSH.
Okay.
There's a section in the guide for that. I thought of that. So if you were to scroll up to the section marked SSH into your machine, it will list, now for Amazon, this lists the steps for connecting.
Right.
Because for Amazon, you also have a key pair that you have to use instead of a
I
password.
think everybody here is just using one of their developers' domains for staging server, correct?
Right. And so you will need to use PuTTY, or you can use on a Mac, you can just use in the terminal, you can use the SSH command to log in.
So I typed with you and said there is no such powers yet.
Which part did it say that?
When it's like cat, SS, idea, and the same, get the key.
Did you run the
Yes,
SSH
I
key
got
gem?
the same.
I will take a look at it in a bit. Okay? You were doing this on your local machine or on your staging server?
How about we do some support work after
Yeah.
the video?
You wouldn't necessarily do this on your local machine. There's no point. This is only on the staging server. Okay, cool. So we've connected, yeah, we connect to the server through PuTTY, which is just SSH for Windows, or you can actually use SSH on a Mac. It's just a command that's in the command line. So you can SSH, and then if you want to leave, you can type exit, and that'll close the connection. Now, once we're here, so we've cloned this, how do we update it, right? So let's say that I'm going to try this one more time, because I swear to God, I'm going to give it a shot. I don't think that's the case, but we'll try it one more time, and maybe I'm just very bad at typing. I'm not going to necessarily rule that out. It seems to like all of this part until I get to the two-factor. Yeah, whatever. Okay. So we'll do it through the web interface, but typically you would have your folder that you have cloned this to your local WordPress installation. You're changing the files there using your favorite text editor. You commit them, you synchronize them up to GitHub. I would really recommend, if you're working with groups, before you do a commit, synchronize the repo to make sure that you've got the latest changes, and then commit. Because otherwise what may happen is that if two people commit at the same time and and one of them syncs first, and then you commit and push without syncing, you may have to merge, and that's not difficult. There are a lot of guides that'll walk you through it, but it's easier just to avoid that. So if you hit sync before you commit, and on the Mac client, there's actually even a button that you can turn on that will automatically sync before you commit, which is great, because then you don't even have to worry about it. But it's not hard either way. So once we've got that set up, I'm gonna make a change to my repo where I'm logged in, just to kind of try this out, right? So back here in my folder, I'm going to say my style.css. I'm going to edit this file, and I'm going to make some changes. I'm going to add like a big old description block. So I'm going to say this is a theme for WEB210. It's pretty fancy. I'm going to commit those changes. So this is the equivalent of somebody, you made these changes locally, you synced them up, they're now in GitHub. How do we get them to the server, right? That's the last step. But from this point on, it's really easy. The way that you get it to the server is you log into your server, right? So I'm here on my server, I've logged in again. I go to my WordPress folder, my WP content themes, and I go all the way into my theme folder. So I'm gonna go all the way into WEB210 test. And then I just say git pull origin master, meaning run a git command that pulls from origin, meaning the place that I got this repo, which is GitHub, and the master branch, which is the main kind of subsection of that repo that you all will probably work in for most of this time. We hit that, and it'll say, okay, cool. So it connects. It counts the amount of work that's done. It'll say fast forwarding style.css, and it'll have a readout of the lines that are removed and are added. And then if I were to cat style.css again, you would see where my changes had been pulled down. So from this point on, deploying to the server is really easy, right? I log in, I go to that folder, I run one command, I log out. And then whatever is the newest copy of files that are in GitHub, they will end up on the server immediately. They will be downloaded, they're checked. I don't have to worry that like they'll get partially uploaded through FTP or something, or they'll stomp all over each other. All of the changes that have been made will be downloaded in one batch and applied. Cool? Makes sense? Surprisingly straightforward.
Is that it?
Right? That's it. That's all there is to it.
Wow.
It's really not that hard.
And so if you will change some files, like keyboard, and then you
Yep.
need to push them in the GitHub, just upload the files.
So the way that my workflow would work, let's try upgrading this real quick. Maybe it doesn't like the fact that it's an old client. So the way that it's going to work is I'm going to have my repo on my hard drive, right? Because I'm working on this locally, and we'll see if this works again. Oh man, if that works, that's amazing. So I've got my local WordPress instance, and it's fully functional, right? So I've got my whole little blog stack running, and I'm connecting to localhost, and I'm editing those files. And so I'm making theme changes, and I'm doing my whole thing. And then, oh, holy crap, I'm logged in. That's amazing. Okay, cool. So for example, like I'd have got my WordPress setup running, and then I would have cloned it, and it'll ask me where I want to put it, right? So I'm going to select, in this case, I'm just going to say GitHub, but you would find the folder where WordPress lives, and you would select, I want to clone into my themes folder. So you would clone like that, and that's going to download the repo. And so once it's done, this is my local copy. And so I might open this in Explorer, and while I'm in Explorer, I might start up Sublime and edit some files, right? So I've got like my README and my style.css, and I'm like, oh, I really want to make it so that everything on the page has the border box rule, because that makes everything easier. Yes, Mike?
I'm going to ask you a really stupid question.
Yes.
But you know it's really a stupid question.
Yes.
So
do I?
So let's say How many of you are going to be working locally on your machine using XAMPP or MAMP or one of those things? A few of you. How many of you would rather you have your own kind of development server stuff and you're working on your, like, let's say, Dreamhost and stuff? How many are going to work that way? Not one of you. Okay. Well, what I was going to ask.
I'm confused as to where the other people are working.
Well, so I didn't raise my hand only because my question then is, aren't we learning this because that's better and applicable to the industry?
Yes, but in other words, we haven't gone over how to install MAMP or XAMPP.
Oh, right.
For that
I thought we were going to
stuff.
use Wikipedia for that, or you know.
Well, there should be guides.
Sure.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, I've set up MAMP and it's pretty easily, but just go with me on this. So let's say, Thomas,
Yeah.
I chose because I'm just used to, I have a Dreamhost account and I can set up as many subdomains as I feel like. And so instead of using my local machine, my laptop is my local server, I'm using my Dreamhost account as my local server.
Sure.
I can still do that just fine using this methodology.
Yes. So you would use the same setup that we are using for the staging server. You would link up your Dreamhost to GitHub in the exact same way. You would clone in the exact same way, and then you would work on that server, and that is effectively your local machine.
Okay.
And then from there, you would just need to use the command line to commit or to add files, commit them
If
in.
it's just so if it's just the theme folder, right?
Yes.
I have all that locally on my hard drive. I just don't want to set up a database and PHP stuff on locally.
Sure.
I'm using, let's say I'm using Dreamhost, which is just kind of my visual. I push it to there to just see all the stuff that I've been working with.
Yes.
And I would still just have that folder on my, see what I'm saying? On my
Yes.
hard drive, and that's what I would to then push to GitHub.
So are you saying that your workflow is that you would have a folder, you would push that folder to GitHub, and then clone that to your Dreamhost?
Yeah. I would be using my Dreamhost server
Uh-huh.
instead of setting up a database in MAMP
Right.
locally on my. So in other words,
Yeah.
the folder, the theme folder, all the code still lives on my hard drive. Because I'm going local push to FTP to my Dreamhost.
Yeah, I just feel like if you're going to do that, why not? If you're
Sorry.
basically just going to edit it on the
Like I said,
server,
it's a stupid question. I'm just asking if it's still.
you could do that, right? You could absolutely like work on your server, then download to your repository and commit up.
Okay.
But it seems like you could just save a hop by
Yeah.
just learn. There's a few command line
Right.
things that you'd have to learn, but then you could just work from that server.
Okay.
And then you wouldn't need.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, you just commit and you log in to do your commits and your pushes. So
It's probably better. Let me ask you this. It's probably better to just set up MAMP or XAMPP or whatever.
I think you would not regret that in the long run. I think it's a lot nicer to have either a local installation, or in my case, I have a virtual machine that's just used for running these things. And then when I have new projects, I just spin those up.
Right. So again, developers, show of hands. How many of you are going to do it locally off your own machine like that?
Good for you.
Great, because that's the way you should be doing it.
Excellent.
Don't listen to me. I'm a designer.
What is it like if you're gonna use MAMP?
Ma'am? Yeah, it's the same way. But you can use the Mac GitHub client. So if you were using if you were developing on a Mac and you've got MAMP installed, so you're running WordPress locally, in your Mac Git client, you would clone the repo to the WP content folder locally, and you would work there, and then you would commit and you would send it up. And it's going to be the same workflow that I'm going to show you right here, okay? So let's pretend that I've cloned this to my WP content folder locally, because I have cloned it, right? It's in this folder. I've got a folder called WEB210 test, and I'm working on it. I'm looking at my changes locally. I've got it open in my editor. I'm like, man, I really want to have box sizing order box because this is amazing, right? This is the best CSS rule on earth. And so this is my big change. I'm gonna make this change. I'm gonna prefix it because I'm awesome like that.
How many of you know about box sizing order box?
All right, so we'll just be
Use it. At
sizing.
least, especially for images,
Okay.
if not everything.
The star rule means you use it for everything,
Yeah.
and I've never been happier with anything in my life.
Yeah.
So I make this change. This is all good. I go back to my client, and you can see it's going to say, oh, you have one change, right? Like, this is a thing that you haven't done. So I'm going to commit this change. I'm going to say adds box sizing rule. And your commit message should be something fairly descriptive, right? You don't want to just use the date because these things are already timestamped. So if you add the date, you're not adding any new information. I can always look and see what the history of changes is by date if I want, right? I can see when these things were made.
And oh, for fuck's sake, is not descriptive.
Right. Please, although you will find those in my repos, don't imitate that part, right? So at the very least, fill out this, and if there's anything that you've done that's tricky, it's good to add some notes about that in the description. And also the other thing you can do is if you want to tag people. So like, let's say that I was working on this, and Mike, what's your GitHub username?
I think it's M-Sinkula, M-S-I-N-K-U-L-A.
Right. So if I wanted to do this, I'd be like, hey, Sinkula, isn't this awesome? And when
it's not Senkulo, it's that
is not true.
Without an ass.
Right.
Spanish.
Totally. With you, 100%. So
It is. It's a true story. Look it up. It's bad. It's horrible.
anyway, so when I commit this and then I synchronize it up, this will actually send a notification. It'll send an email to Mike. So it'll let him know. So if there's anything that I needed to tag other members of my team in, I could add their notes to it. And then if I was making a change that would be unexpected or breaking, I could just be like, hey, here's the thing you guys should be aware of when you sync next. Just be warned, like you're going to see this thing come down the pipe, right? So this is a really handy way. The other thing that my team at work will use this for is we will tag each other with questions. We'll be like, hey, I got this thing halfway and now I don't know what to do. Anyone got any ideas? And then in the GitHub commit, you can actually have a conversation, right? Like GitHub is a whole Facebook for web developers. So you can log in and you can comment back and forth and you can paste code snippets. And then once you've worked it out, you make another commit with the solution, which is great.
What did we do before GitHub?
We cried and we moved files from place to place on USB drives. And it was pretty awful. It was. All right, so I've committed this. It's going to be committed by ClueTrain because I really should have gone through and changed my. Actually, one of my.
Yeah, good old ClueTrain.
It's one of the wonderful people who's in the computer lab who has insisted that they need to be logged into everything. If we'll hang on a second, I can actually. If you do this the first time, I want to show you guys something cool. Amend username. There's this thing where like apparently they're totally used to this being a thing that you can do, and you can actually rewrite the last commit before you push. So if you see this, you can say commit amend with a new author, which is a really nice thing to be able to do. So I should be able to say git commit amend author is Thomas Wilburn. News at thomaswilburn.net.
ClueTrain was all over my level in the 70 class.
Yeah, he's bad about that, man. Like he's all, and so you can see I've now changed the author. It's still committed by ClueTrain, but it's at least authored by me, so it'll be assigned to my activity log. And now I can sync this up. So once I've synchronized this, that's going to go up, and it's going to be uploaded to GitHub. But you can make multiple commits if you want to, right? Like you can commit repeatedly, and like I said, what's great about this is I don't have to be connected. So if I'm on like a long road trip, or if I'm the kind of person who goes to the beach and then, you know, makes commits because I'm that kind of dude. So like if I'm off at my beach house and I decide I really need to change something, I don't have to be connected to the internet or even reliably connected to do that. I can make a whole series of commits and then synchronize them once I get back, which is great. Once it's synchronized though, if we go back and we look at our file, our changes have made it onto GitHub, right? So every time that I've committed and synced, it's made it up there. And then to deploy it on the server, again, I just git pull origin master. And you can see that it has updated style.css. There are 7 new lines of code, 7 insertions, no deletions. And there's my updates. Piece of cake. Really, really easy.
So says Thomas.
Well,
Lead developer at CL Times.
yes. So all of these things, every bit that we just did, is all located in this enormous document called EC2 WordPress and Git.
Which is linked from my assignment page.
Right. And for those of you who are not using EC2, you're using DigitalOcean or DreamHost or whatever it is that you can get access to, you can skip down to the part that says connecting to GitHub and work from there. And you'll notice that it's actually, once you get past my enormous ASCII flowchart, it's actually a really small part of the document. There's not a lot to it. It's really pretty easy.
Developers, you feel confident in this? Yeah? Good. And you will not make your designers cry? That much? Make them cry a little bit. It's good for them. It's good for you. It's good for you.
Okay. Anyone have any other questions about this? Yeah.
I'm on Mac. I'm looking at the OSX directions for the key, the SSH key.
Are you looking at the GitHub directions or my directions?
Your directions on.
So my directions are for you to log into the staging server. On your Mac locally, you should just log into the Mac client that you download from mac.github.com.
Okay. I guess I'm looking at when you're actually
Going into the staging server, yes. Uh-huh.
So, but what has say like the key has a little SSH stuff key pair name.
Uh-huh.
So,
Right, so where are you hosted?
DreamHost.
Okay, so if you're connecting to DreamHost, chances are that you can just SSH username at yourserver.com, and then you can just do username password. So that -i and then the keypair.pem is specifically for EC2, where they do not let you use a password. You must use a key pair.
So I don't have to do that.
Nope. And I'm logging out before somebody decides to get rid of all of my stuff. Cool. Any other questions?
Can you?
Let's get,
Oh, sorry.
So no matter where you are, whether you're at school, working from school, or at home, or anywhere, if you don't have your own laptop, that's none of this is an issue.
so if you don't have your own laptop, you could work just using the direct editor on the GitHub website, but I don't really recommend it because then it's hard to test. I would recommend using a situation kind of like what Mike was talking about, where you would have a remote server that you FTP into, and you would edit there, and then that server would also be linked to GitHub, and you would push from that server to GitHub.
That's kind of why I asked that question.
Yes. So for example, we are now logged into, so this is actually my, my server that I use for hosting like thomaswilburn.net and all that good stuff. So I might decide to make a change here. So I might FTP into the server. So I might say, okay, I want to WinSCP into thomaswilburn.net. Log in real quick.
You need to be doing the same for DreamHost,
I assume so, yes.
if that's the one.
Right. So I would log into this, and then I could go to this file where I've got this stuff here, WEB210 test, and I could edit this file. And I would try and, you all know about the way in settings that you can set a different editor for WinSCP, right? Because this is really obnoxious. You can go into options, preferences, and under editors, you can add like, if I browse for Notepad++ so that I do not have to spend all of my time in either the crappy editor or like Crimson Edit or some horrible thing like that, right? So I can go to Program Files, Notepad++, and select that and then pull that up to the top of the list. And now when I edit files, ta-da, right? I'm in a real editor. So if that were the case, right, I'm logged into now your server on DreamHost or whatever, and I would say, okay, well, I'm going to log in. I'm going to work on this. I'm going to test some stuff. So I want the body. The font family is Roboto, followed by sans serif. OS. I would save my files, I see if everything looks good, and then I decide to make a commit. So in that case, you would need to use the Git commands that are on the command line. And there's a really good book that will walk you through all the, I mean, GitHub actually has some tutorials, but there's also, if you go to gitscm.com, they actually have, the book Pro Git is available to read online for free. And it uses only the command line, and it'll walk you through all the basics, and it'll even talk about like what's going on with Git when I do something, right? When I make changes, how does this work? What are the commands that I type? How do I add new files and stage them and commit them and do all this stuff? So this is a great resource to have where I can commit. So on my command line, I would say, okay, if I look at the Git status, and apparently I have to log in again to save those changes. There we go. Look at the Git status, it'll say, okay, I have one file that's modified, which is style.css, right? And if I want, I can even look at a diff and I can see, hey, here are the lines that were added. And it'll show me, these are the things that you changed since you committed. And so I can say git commit -a-m. So the A means that I'm going to add any files that are available. And the M says that I'm going to type the commit message. So the same place that we would have the little box in the GitHub client, I would just type it here between quotes. So I would say added body font styles. So that makes a commit. And to sync, I would say git push origin master instead of pull. And that would push it up to GitHub so that now when we go back here and we look at this file, I have my font family. So you can connect a remote server to GitHub as well, and then synchronize between those two, just like it was a local machine. That's totally fine. And if you don't have a laptop, that's a really good way to work. That's actually the way that I work on a lot of projects. Actually, a lot of the things that I have, my server in the cloud is my development environment.
So it was not a stupid question.
Not entirely.
Just a little bit.
But it with more context, it makes sense.
Sure.
And that's what she brought to the
Well,
conversation.
yeah.
Right? Context, earthiness, a kind of,
You're going to rely on me for context?
well, no, but that's just you know, part
So
of the joy of working.
My question was
Yes.
about Clue Train.
Yeah.
Can you hack into the school's computer and change Clue Train? Do you know how to do that, Thomas?
There are
Can you?
a number of things that I would love to do first before I would get around to Clue Train. The primary one is removing browser and
Oh, come on, no.
and Netscape Navigator.
Yeah.
Those two.
Theoretically.
Theoretically,
You could.
if I had that power, I would in a heartbeat.
Okay. You know how to, though. Can you do it?
No.
If I asked you.
I- on
gave you
camera.
$20,
On camera, I can neither confirm nor deny the ability to hack into the school's virtual machine images. Also, Safari, seriously, like,
'cause I
are you
really
trying
want
to make me
do
cry?
is what I'm saying.
So, anyway, no, unfortunately, you'll just have to be careful with Clue Train there. So, any other questions? That was a great question.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you run into problems, and you may, right? Git is not terribly hard. It's also a little cryptic, and it's well known for being a little cryptic, and that's fine. One thing to remember is that the worst case scenario, so Git is a distributed version control system. So that means that the absolute worst case scenario that you can get into, let's say that you're working on something locally and something goes wrong, or there's a merge or something and everything blows up. The thing that you can do, worst case scenario, is delete that folder and re-clone it, or like move it somewhere else, re-clone it and put your changes back in. And that will be fine. Like if you end up in a situation where somebody else is committed and you get into a merge conflict and you're freaking out and things are catching fire and the cat's running around like crazy, worst case scenario, it's distributed. Nothing will be broken if you rename your folder and re-clone it with a fresh copy and then put your changes back in, and then you'll be able to see, oh, this is where everything, that'll repair history, right? So the other option, please feel free to contact me. I am happy to answer questions about this workflow, about Git. I realize that this is not something necessarily that you've done as groups before. So I totally get that. And I am here to help, because to me, this is a really important process of working on a software team. And I know that for some of you, at least, that's where you want to be, right?
And Thomas will also be teaching this, the ITC 210 portion of this in the fall.
That's right.
So he is like the right guy for the 210 class.
Now, the other thing that should actually be really useful is when I taught this last fall, I think, I actually used the same repo, ITC 210 resources, for all of my documentation there. And so there was a bunch of stuff here where I talk about, like, here's how to set up your repos and here's how to collaborate. I have basically all the steps that we went through is in a separate document. There's some requirements that you don't have to pay attention to. If you run into anything else, you can also just add an issue to this repo and say, hey, I don't understand this, or there's not enough information, or I ran into this problem, can you help me document it? And then I can add that, and then we all benefit from those better resources, right? So the ways that you have to get in touch with me, my email address, scc@thomaswilburn.net. You can ask Mike and he can bug me. You can file an issue against the repo and it'll automatically email me. All of those things are great ways to get in touch, and please, please let me know if you have any issues. I'm happy to help.
He's really good at the back and forth conversation.
Yes.
The only thing he's not good at is if you ask him for help with a function, right? He's supposed to meet you in your office, ignore your office twice. But then he'll figure it out.
Oh, I see.
Okay.
There's
The good news about Mike is he lets these things go, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't harbor a grudge, and that's what's really nice about it. Is I don't feel like I'm ever on the hook with him for anything.
So is it, should we set all of our team members up as?
So they should be collaborators on that repo. And so one person should be picked to be kind of the canonical person. Pick someone that you trust if you want to use this. The nice thing that you can do actually is once this is done, and you're all going to go your separate ways, you can go to GitHub and you can actually fork the repo, and that will make a copy. And then no matter what they do to theirs, it will preserve your copy of the repo at the point in time when you forked it. So, you know, worst case scenario, you're working with Sunny Jim and he decides that he's going to turn this beautiful portfolio site into a guide to, you know, eloquent lemming care. It doesn't matter to you, right? You've got to fork your version in single shape. So, but yes, making everybody collaborators and then everyone can commit and clone from that repo is the best way to go.
And that's also the reason why in this class you could work, you know, your development staging server could be on the client's live server, but I always recommend against that, so you have that demo portfolio copy right on one of your developers' servers. That's for that reason that they, because I've had sites that I've launched that when I've gone back to them, you know, like the footer is broken, for instance.
Right. Yeah, it's not really just your team members. It's really your client also could take part in the destruction of your legacy. So good times. Yeah.
Does it matter what you call your repo in your GitHub? Are all of our repos have to be the same name?
Well, so when you're working on the team, the one person who creates it, you will all clone from there, and so they will all be named after that.
Okay, and when we push, we have to push up to. Okay. Got
Yeah,
it.
there's only one repo.
Yeah, there would only, because you would only each have one for your whole team.
Okay.
Don't name it Blue Train.
I've always, actually, what I've really wanted is I think our revenge should be, we should just make a bunch of commits that are at ClueTrain, and just kind of until he understands that, like, we don't want our name, we should do like all of the commits where you're like fixing this name issue should be like at ClueTrain, putting my real name on here because the computer labs are run by people who hate us. And then after enough emails, they'll probably go through and change it.
That's a good strategy, WEB210 class.
Just a thought that I had, you know, when I was
There is a time
amending
and
them.
place for passive aggressivity.
Well, you live in Seattle,
Especially at the
right?
community college.
This is the place for it.
Yeah.
Now is the time.
Yeah, I'm saying. So,
Until the earthquake wipes out everything west of 5.
yeah, you saw that tonight?
Oh, my wife has been freaking out about that all day long. She was asking where we should move, and she was suggesting Detroit
Yeah.
because it's going to be less of a wreck once the big one hits.
Well, I'm gonna, me and his wife, we're gonna move to my dad's or like be out in Idaho.
Mhm.
But then Yellowstone is gonna get us. No matter where you are,
Yeah.
something's gonna get
You
you.
gotta go to
Yeah.
Canada.
But
But then 2030 with the ice age, right? I mean.
yeah, then the glaciers are gonna come moving in.
Right.
I mean, anywhere we go.
Yeah, you go further
I guess
east,
you could
it's
stop recording.
tornadoes.
You think?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Thomas.
Absolutely.